Mike, a lot has happened in the world since we got together a week ago. So we've gone to war.
Yeah, that's one thing.
All right, we'll cover that as a betting proposition soon. It's an unpleasant life proposition. Christy Nome was fired today, so if you had first to go, her as first to go in the cabinet, you won that one.
Right.
And we had a series of primaries on Tuesday. Did you watch news at all, or have any? Did you bet? Have any lessons?
I wasn't betting on it, but the one race I sort of followed intermittently was the one between Crockett and Tallarico. So we'll see what happens with the corresponding Republican primary, whether Cornyn or Paxton gets the nomination. But my takeaway from that is since Tallarico won, if it goes to Tallarico v. Paxton, we could see a real upset in the Texas Senate race.
Hmm. I've heard that one before. We'll see.
He's a little less Beto, though, you know? Tallarico seems more polished. I actually think he's excellent, so
Okay. Well, I'm always tempted to put my feelings in. We are actual flesh and blood human beings, but I'm not sure where before I analyze this as a betting proposition, I want to
yeah,
see
not right
I want to
now.
see a poll.
Sure,
So,
of course. Me too. Me
yeah.
too. What about you? Do you have any major takeaways from the primaries?
Um, well, I did bet, and actually, I'm gonna use it to talk about something that I think is important. So we hadn't discussed it and here, and I don't think you and I had really discussed it either privately, but I did think both favorites were somewhat overpriced. And in the Cornyn Paxton, so the Real Clear Politics polling average had Paxton up 3.8 points. However, Cornyn had come in ahead in a couple of polls, 3 polls, I think, and one high quality poll.
Mm.
And, he spent an enormous amount of money on the race. So I had considered a bet on Cornyn, who was at 17 cents. Now, I watched early returns. I'm about to say something that I'm incredibly embarrassed by, but I think there's a lesson certainly for me, maybe for you, but probably for more than us. So I was watching the early returns and Cornyn was outperforming. And I thought there was a reason to think that, right? So far, there's been a pretty consistent Democrats have outrun certainly where they ran against Trump last year, but even outrunning polling expectations. And as the more moderate candidate, it was conceivable to me that Cornyn would outrun his numbers. And at a certain point, by the time you had about 35% of the vote in, he was ahead by 2.5 points. And I looked at the distribution of the outstanding vote, and the Republican primary dynamic there had a similar dynamic to most national political races in that Cornyn ran better in urban areas. So there was most of the outstanding. There was plenty of outstanding vote in the urban areas. Like Paxton was running ahead in the 6th most populous county, and then the 15th most populous county. So it was enough of a sample that it seemed to me logical to conclude that Cornyn was running ahead. I waited a minute, and then I started to bet. And then more return came in, and I bet some more.
Right.
I think I blended in around 30 cents. Now, what's interesting about this, I'll just say this. I almost never, and it's the difference between, I think of what I think, we've talked about this before. I think of what I do. I think you think of what you do as investing, not gambling, right?
Of course.
Right. Okay. So there are certain times of day, right? So people think I'm crazy. I think of poker playing as investing.
I do too.
Okay.
So that makes total sense. Yeah.
I mean, I have a lifetime record of significant profit to show for it, and I'm aware that in any, I could get all my money in with aces versus somebody with 7-2, and I'm still going to lose,
Yes. It beats
10% of the time,
sure.
right? But, if I put my money in enough advantageous situations, I'm going to do pretty well. Now, every poker player is familiar with the concept of tilt, which is when you're upset and you're operating emotionally.
Mhm.
And I will say, and you've said this, I try to concentrate my wagers during the day, like to make, I try to think about them for a while. I'm definitely like a long thinker. So the Texas thing happened and whatever, it's like 9 o'clock at night. And I'm like, oh, well, this is crazy.
Mhm.
At a minimum, it should be 50-50, right?
Right, yeah.
So I started throwing some money in. And, I am embarrassed to say this. I forgot that there was a runoff, that there would be a runoff. So I was aware of that, but it completely slipped my mind. So really, there was a point there where I was like, well, corn should be going up to 70 or 80%,
Mhm.
but he really shouldn't have because there would be, and there still is.
Going to be a runoff, right?
Well, unless Trump, I mean, it seems that Trump might endorse Cornyn, in which case there wouldn't be a runoff. But anyway, I forgot that. And then I realized that. And I was like, oh, really? If he got up to 52%, that would be a big number because he's not. So I'm
He might
distinguishing here.
sell at 52, in other
Correct.
words, right.
I'm distinguishing. I mean, Kalshi price. I mean, prediction market price as opposed to what he had in the vote. If he could get to 52% of the vote, then there wouldn't be a runoff. So anyway, I started to sell. It worked out fine. I made as a percentage, a great profit, but I thought I was a little lucky in that it was the rare time where I thought I was undisciplined. It was late at night. I was really tired. I'm definitely an early to bed, early to rise person. And so I just think if you're going to adopt the discipline of doing this, that was a mistake. And I know you thought I got a little lucky too. So
Well, yeah, you got a little lucky. Actually, when you texted me about it, I was a little surprised. I was happy that you were in the green, but you usually go for locks, whereas I sometimes will go for more market movement and where I think it's gonna go. Um, why do you think you jumped in on this sort of halfway irrationally as opposed to other
well,
propositions?
I don't think it was irrational.
Okay.
I think he was. I think there was a point at which he was a lock to win a plurality of the vote.
Mm,
What I think I'm lucky about is that I forgot that there was a runoff.
yeah.
So
So you were pricing the
and
market sort
actually,
of
well,
incorrectly
then I
by
got
not
unlucky. But then
considering.
I got unlucky. Then I got unlucky, right?
Yeah.
Because it is possible if this was a contested runoff. So I went to bed. I was ready to go to bed and just say I'll just hold it. And then
Good thing you didn't.
well, no, he's at 80. He's at 87 cents now.
Well, it had flipped, so you at one point would have been down to 11 cents. I don't know at what point exactly.
If I had held on to it, I'd have doubled my money beyond where it was, right?
Yeah.
But that's now could anybody have foreseen that Trump's endorsement would go to Cornyn? Now, Paxton is a very, very problematic individual.
He does seem more consistent with the MAGA brand.
Oh, I mean, he
Right.
doesn't seem it. He is.
Yeah.
So, I think that's just kind of that's very substantively interesting that Trump is considering endorsing Cornyn. That never would have happened a year ago.
I think Trump is probably at this point trying to moderate and preserve the candidates that he thinks are going to perform best against the Democrats. And I
I,
think Cornyn is clearly going to perform better against Alarico.
I think that's right. Well, obviously, we're going to talk about the House and Senate races ahead. We'll do that sometime soon. I mean, I think it's fair to say the Democrats are way better positioned than they were a year ago, but I think that is priced into the markets for the most part. We'll see if we find any exceptions. All right. So we did the shutdown last week. Do you have any remaining bets on the shutdown?
No, I had none even last week. I think I closed out a day before we recorded. The market, still seems to be largely priced well. I think I exploited what was there to exploit, and I've kind of moved on for the moment. What about you?
Uh,
You went in the DHS market?
I'm still in. So I had announced last week that I was going to sell over the weekend.
Uh-huh.
I actually bought more.
Oh, you're talking about the above 90-day proposition?
I went a little longer on the longs, and I'll tell you why. So the prices started to go down.
I saw that, and it went down to, like, 12 cents, right?
Now, I've
Yeah.
said this to people, and I think it's interesting about our personalities. So I get that doesn't necessarily. I mean, it worries me at some level, but I get contrarian, or I'm curious, like what's driving that. And what I believed, and I'm reasonably confident, What was driving it was we had attacked Iran, and that there was some Republican rhetoric effectively saying that DHS needed to be funded as a matter of, national
Right.
security.
It's an emergency kind of thing. Yeah.
So there
But
did
everything's an emergency these
r-
days.
r- right, and there really didn't seem to be any Democratic response, and I didn't really see the connection. Like that wasn't like funding, the Navy.
Sure.
Um, so I bought a little more, and I'm up on that too. Um,
And roughly what's Yes trading at right now?
well, it depends on which, the above 90 days is
Yeah,
around,
90 days.
it's probably around 19 or 20 cents, I
It's
think.
excellent for you, right?
Yeah. So, but I'm prepared to get out
I
this
think you
weekend.
should. I don't think you should roll the dice on this one again.
Uh,
Not that I really think it's a dice roll, but there's
uh,
clearly risk, right?
there's risk.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will say on the shutdown market, one thing that I think is basically a lock. We're recording this on Thursday night. We'll put it out on Friday. There's a market for whether you had been interested originally in whether DHS was funded. So there's one whether DHS is funded by next Tuesday. That's not going to happen.
Right.
The Senate has just rejected a funding resolution today. They're not going to revote on it on Friday. They're all going home for the weekend, and the rules in the Kalshi market, are that it has to be signed by the president. So that's not going to happen by Tuesday. So if you're interested in short-term 2% returns, which I think you and I are on the same page, we both are, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And, don't forget, don't sleep on a 97-cent buy order. You could get that
Oh,
filled.
right.
It's significant. Obviously, 50% more return.
Right. I just don't like leaving those orders open because,
Anything can happen at
yeah,
any
I just
time.
feel
Yeah.
like, anyway, so.
Right. Yeah. All right. Anything else to say about the DHS bets before we move into the Supreme
I
Court?
you can make fun of me if I'm still in on the shutdown when we meet next week.
Please cash out reasonably soon is my advice. All right. So we're going to talk about the Supreme Court today a little bit. So Evan is our certified expert in the Supreme Court. Last week you mentioned the market that was a lock. You want to tell us more about that?
Um, right. So it closed. Uh, it I won the bet. It was a lock. Uh, so we're just starting this. I kind of want to be completely, you know, I don't think we can cover everything in every market all the time, but in our lane, which is maybe politics and law, I think we'll try to cover a lot of it. Now, this was a very small market, which is why and I didn't think it was going to resolve by this week. Um, the New York City had sued the Trump administration. The Trump administration had tried to enjoin congestion pricing,
Right.
and the city had sued, basically saying that the Trump administration's actions were, arbitrary. So, kind of the legal basis doesn't matter, but they had prevailed on an injunction, and an injunction. One of the elements of an injunction is the likelihood of success on the merits.
Sure.
So the judge is effectively saying, "I think you're going to win this case."
Yes.
Okay. I then went and read the Trump administration's lawyer's brief, and it was so. Some people may know that they don't exactly get the best lawyers. The brief it was it was pretty poor. Certainly didn't raise any compelling legal argument that I thought there was any chance was going to change the mind of a judge who had already said which way he was going to rule.
Right. Right.
Now, the only reason I didn't want to disclose it was there just wasn't that much money there, so I got a lot of 88 and 89 cents. Um, and so anyway, but he happened to issue his judgment this week. I don't recall whether I had mentioned it. I was very confident that the Supreme Court was going to hold tariffs
Right. The tariffs decision. Yep.
unconstitutional, or without statutory basis. So, but
Question on the congestion pricing case. I know it came out in your favor, but going into that, did you think it was a hard lock? Meaning that
100%.
100%. Okay. That's a really good return then. Buying at 80.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. It's fine. Yeah.
So now talking about, the markets that are still in play. Have you seen any locks in the current Supreme Court markets?
Okay. So there are some, I would say, some propositions that are worth a look at. Okay, first of all, I don't know what folks know, but the Supreme Court term generally it runs famously from the first Wednesday in October, first Tuesday in October,
No.
through basically the last day of June, and then they all go on summer vacation. So we're nearing the end of the period where they argue cases, and we already had the tariff decision. You're going to get major decisions. They often hold the most controversial ones for the last day or two of the term so they can get away, or so the abortion decision, Hobbs wasn't released until the last day of the term. Um, so I think there's a proposition, Kalshi has a proposition, which is whether or not the Supreme Court is going to uphold state bans on restrictions against transgender athletes participating. So it's really trans uh, gender girls, so born biologically boys who want to compete on a girls' sports teams. And there's a pair of cases that are addressing this. Um, the Supreme Court is going to uphold the state actions. I mean, I would estimate it at 99.9%.
Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what legal issues are at play and why
Yeah.
you think they're going to?
Okay. So there really are only two kind of cases or precedents that you need to know about. So Justice Neil Gorsuch had written an opinion in a case called Bostock, which struck down, and this was kind of a surprise that Gorsuch took the position at the time. It struck down a funeral home that fired someone who was transgender as a violation of federal civil rights laws. And then in a case called Scrimeti, the court upheld some Tennessee restrictions on transgender surgery.
Mm.
Okay. So this case is more like the restrictions on transgender surgery than it is like firing somebody.
Yeah.
So if a state had tried to say transgender athletes may not participate in sports, that would be discriminatory against that would discriminate them against them on the basis of trans status. But they're going to say that this is subject to, in the court would say, rational relation test. It's not subject to strict scrutiny. So all the state's going to have to do is just demonstrate any kind of reasonable connection between its goal and that. And I'll tell you also, like, I don't know why folks should pay more attention. The justices basically announce what they're going to do during oral arguments. So
if you listen,
yeah, so
you
six of
might
the
make money.
justices said which way they were going to go on this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this one is pretty certain.
Pretty certain and trading right now, yes, at 96 cents. Is it a buy at 96 cents?
To buy at
It's a
96
buy at
cents.
96 cents. All right. What other locks do you see in the market?
Okay, so nothing else is a lock.
All right.
I will say I'll go down the list of, there aren't that many markets on outstanding decisions.
Right. It's like 4 or 5 maybe
Yeah.
left, right? Yeah.
Okay.
So which one's most likely to resolve yes, no, or no?
Okay. So there's a case called U.S. versus Hermani, which was a prosecution. Basically, what happens is this guy gets picked up for uh, possession of marijuana and is found with a gun.
Mhm.
Okay. And that violates a federal statute. But he wasn't under the influence of marijuana at the time he was arrested.
Mm.
So it's a somewhat ambitious prosecution under the statute. Now, okay, so this one I listened live to the oral argument. And actually, maybe down the road, what we'll do is live stream a Supreme Court oral argument and just analyze it from, a gambling proposition.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea to do live stream. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that one hadn't been signaled. And um, so it was an unusual, right? It's partially a Second Amendment case, right?
Sure.
The Second Amendment is the constitutional issue that's being litigated. And the Trump administration was on the side of upholding the prosecution. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's unusual dynamic, right?
'Cause he just rescheduled marijuana, and now he's trying to take away
Right, trying to.
Second Amendment rights in a sort of
So you have
backward
you
way,
have
right?
right, you have a conflict of values, which is pro law and order, anti drugs
Sure.
versus pro Second Amendment. My inclination going in was that the court would side with the Trump administration. I was just sort of defaulting to like kind of political, who pointed political bias heuristics.
Right. Could I ask you one
Of
question
course.
before you proceed? So, I'm just curious, with having the gun and the marijuana, right? Is what's the issue here whether the person was high at the time the gun was seized, or is it that he just had marijuana in his system and was a casual user in general? Do you know?
So the question really is whether, his status as he can be punished effectively for his status as a drug user by virtue of having been in possession. So let me draw a contrast.
Sure.
If you've been convicted of a crime, you also you can't have
Gun.
a gun,
Yeah,
right?
if you're a felon, right?
Okay, but that is an adjudicated status. So you
Yes.
would know that you're a convict. But, I used to have a prescription for Ambien downstairs.
Ambien can mess you up worse than marijuana.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the point is, and right now, would I understand right now that I am covered by the statute as a drug user and therefore can't be in possession of a firearm? And it's pretty clear. So let's just flag that for one
Sure.
second. So I went in thinking, okay, they're going to go with the Trump administration. It was immediately clear at the oral argument that this was going to go the other way. And I'll explain to you the dynamics in a second. So I sold and bought in at the other side at a very low price. And over the course of the oral argument, so I think now it's trading at 85 cents. And I think I bought, um, I'm sorry, the yes is 15 cents. So the no is 85 cents, right?
Wow.
And, I bought the no around 40 cents. Sorry for thinking it in those terms. It was clear that the case was going to come out for the defendant. Now, and this I think it'll be easier for me to explain kind of the legal issue through this example.
Mhm.
Some people were, there were some people who were concerned about the restriction on the Second Amendment, right? That he had a Second Amendment right to possess the firearm. But there was some liberal justices who were disturbed with the concept of whether the person could be branded, categorized, classified as an addict effectively simply by virtue of possession without any adjudication of the status. And so it's going to, it divided on not on ideological lines, but Jackson, actually, Kagan was kind of on the other side, but Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett were clearly with the defendant, and as were Jackson and Sotomayor and Gorsuch. Okay. Now here's why I wouldn't put it as a lock.
Alright.
I'm if you said what's the chance that Hermione's going to win the case, it's 99 cents, 99%. But and I think people have to I don't you could pause here for you to tell me how you navigate this. I wasn't convinced that the rules were clear. I think the case will not be decided on Second Amendment grounds. I think the case will be decided on a much narrower basis that it hadn't been shown that Armani satisfied the definition of habitual drug user or whatever the statute required, which I don't recall at the moment. And I'm not sure whether that satisfies the condition. And I don't like to deal with any uncertainty regarding the conditions.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying here, and this is something that goes through my mind when I'm thinking about, markets that are trading at, let's say, above 90 cents for a proposition that I think is really valued at 99 cents. You have to be very cautious about the contract and resolution terms. There's always sort of well, not always, but in most markets, there's an arguable ambiguity. Um, Kalshi maintains a review board that can review contested markets and resolutions. So there's always kind of like this ambient risk in the background. Like, is somebody going to define something in a way that seems counterintuitive, but actually leads to resolution against you, right? So that's something I'm always considering in the background. But for this particular case, you're saying the mechanism of resolution is unclear because it has to be resolved on the basis of the Second Amendment.
Right. I thought there was a little bit of uncertainty. I thought the case could be decided in Romani's favor without deciding it under the Second Amendment. And it wasn't clear to me that it satisfies the condition. I think it's most likely, overwhelmingly likely that it does,
Right.
but I don't want to deal with that for a 15.
Neither do I. I would
Right.
not buy. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So let me ask you about a few others. SCOTUS is supposed to take up, or SCOTUS may take up a
No,
court.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, SCOTUS may take up a court decision regarding the Voting Rights Act. So one of the markets that's outstanding right now is, will SCOTUS weaken the Voting Rights Act? So maybe first of all, if you can, start with the mechanism of resolution here because it seems a little ambiguous
Ambiguous.
to
Yeah.
me. And then tell me where you stand. Right now, yes is at 88 cents. What do you think?
Okay, so this case is Louisiana versus Calais. It's possible, if you've read about it, it's a very unusual. The procedural history is very unusual, but effectively, what happened is Louisiana gerrymandered
Hmm.
a second black congressional district.
Okay.
Okay, now what's unusual about it is that it was in response to a prior court challenge under the Voting Rights Act.
Hmm.
So there had been all of the states are gerrymandering the districts all the time, right?
Right.
And they're generally gerrymandering them by party, which the Supreme Court has said is fine, even
Right.
if that has an incidental effect on race representation, which happens all the time.
Sure.
So long that is not the direct effect, the court has said. Now, okay. So you couldn't legislate a district to minimize black representation. That has been clear.
But you could to minimize Democratic representation.
Correct. Now, the question is, could you gerrymander to maximize black representation? Okay. It was clear from the oral argument that the court is going to strike down this gerrymandered district. Okay. Again, so that one's 99%.
Right. Does that qualify as weakening the Voting Rights Act?
Okay. So that's the question.
Yeah.
So this, if you read the rules here, and if I did it now, it'll take a full minute to read it. There's a very, very long set of propositions. Now, again, I think this is possible. It's not likely, but that the court could decide this on narrower grounds. And the court could find that Louisiana wasn't acting with conscious racial. So Louisiana's position is we weren't acting with conscious racial motive. We were acting to respond to the prior decision, which had struck down the earlier gerrymandered district for giving inadequate representation.
So in other words, they were retrying their previous failure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. That like our motivation was to satisfy the district court, and this is the way we did it.
Yes.
And we thought the way to do it was to increase black representation, but that wasn't our direct object. It's an interesting distinction. So there's a whiff of uncertainty in my mind that the court holds that the Voting Rights Act does not allow states to gerrymander with conscious, explicitly for race distribution purposes. So it's just, again, because of the complication of the rules. I'm certain about the outcome of the case.
Right.
It probably overwhelmingly likely is right, but I don't want to deal with any uncertainty of that sort.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think like the noise in the prices is really attributable to these, resolution ambiguities, right? So
I think so. I do think, though, generally speaking, the tariff market was wrong, right? The tariff market, based on the oral argument, the tariff market should have been 99 cents that the court was going to rule strike down the tariffs. And, it wasn't. And I do think there are enough people out there that sort of they're just sort of looking at it in a kind of blunderbuss political way. It's Trump's Supreme Court. They're going to back him without like, these are really, really smart people and they're very articulate and they, in many cases, tell you exactly what they think.
Yeah. I just think a lot of people are fearful of ideological alignment even when, institutional pressures are gonna prevent that to some degree. But, yeah, it's totally understandable. Anything else to say about that one before we move on to the next market?
No, no, I you know, I don't know if it's worth it for a 10% return on that.
Right. No, that makes sense. All right. So now we're going to talk about, will the Supreme Court overturn gay marriage? And I just kind of like to preface this by saying, you know, going into Trump 2, this was my litmus test for reasonability. So when I would talk with people and they would out of hand just sort of argue that, of course, the court is going to overturn gay marriage. Look at what's happening culturally in the country. Be like, that's a pretty unreasonable position. I think you have to qualify that substantially. I've been pretty convinced for a while now that the court will not overturn this question. But why don't you give us your opinion? So right now, it's trading at 85% no. As I understand it, they already declined review on a related case. What's the chance they pick up review of another case, and what's the chance it's overturned?
Um, so this one is a 3-year proposition, right? There are
Mm,
some markets there which are whether something happens before the end of Trump's term. So it's not if this were is the Supreme Court going to do this before December of 2026, and you could anything you get would be worth taking because there's no chance of it. And so what Mike just alluded to is the Supreme Court has a process by which it decides whether to grant an appeal. It's called a writ of certiorari or granting cert. The Supreme Court grants cert in very few cases. Literally, a grant of cert means that the 4 justices want the case to be heard. It's an interesting thing strategically. Generally, they vote to grant cert if they think they're going to win, but sometimes they vote because they think it's important that something be decided. So all we can literally say is that a direct challenge to Obergefell, the case which uh, protected gay marriage constitutionally, they didn't grant cert this term. And there's nothing in the hopper anywhere, right?
right.
There's no, so with Supreme Court decisions, um, the court is going to act where there's confusion across the circuit courts, and there is no confusion across the circuit courts on this,
Mhm.
right? Obergefell is a perfectly clear decision. However, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, there was no confusion among the circuit courts. They just
But
deemed it important.
Roe v. Wade was a little bit shakier legally, right? I mean, the whole tripartite division and whether or not they were legislating as opposed to reading the law.
So I'm trying to, without getting into the merits of it, I'm just saying the process by which the court generally decides cert, that was, you know, you have a perfectly reasonable position on that. But that was an unusual cert grant.
Yes.
Okay. There wasn't, so this is the circuit court judges are saying, oh, help us, Supreme Court. The Third Circuit has gone this way. The Fourth Circuit has gone this way.
Sure.
We don't know which way to go. We need your brilliant guidance. That wasn't happening with Roe v. Wade, and they did it anyway. Um, so wait, you think there's no chance?
I don't think there's no
Mm.
chance. I just think it's unlikely. It's very unlikely. You know better than I do, and that's why I wanted to ask you this question. So, how do you view the Supreme Court not granting cert to a case that would have potentially led to overruling gay marriage? I mean, does that seem like a solid basis to assume they're not going to take up a similar case in the future, or does that seem unrelated to you?
Does the fact that how much do I make out of the fact that they didn't grant cert?
Correct.
It's not conclusive.
It's not. Tell me why.
Uh, I mean, in Supreme Court history, for example, my book is about a Supreme Court decision in which they struck down the death penalty as unconstitutional. It was later significantly modified, but the court effectively declined to grant cert in the case that became Roe v. Wade because it didn't think the American public could handle 2 decisions of this magnitude in the same year. So they put it off.
That's
So
a great point. I didn't think that through. Right.
yeah, I mean it's not there's kind of no way to know on this one.
But your point is that the court will actually weigh based on their perception of public opinion when they're going to release decisions, and they certainly wouldn't be inclined to, render 2 decisions that were really unpalatable at the same time.
Well,
That's
it's
what you're saying.
really, really important to just be very clear that there's no institutional they. There's just 9 individuals who vote. And, we've seen this. Trump was extraordinarily disappointed in Roberts and Barrett and
Sickly so, yeah.
yeah, sure. And Gorsuch is certainly independent minded. I think Alito is pretty reliably
And Thomas
and
too,
Thomas is
right?
pretty reliably pro-Trump, but the others have shown independence in different regards. So we don't even know like why they voted no. Somebody might have said, "Oh, I really want to do this, but I don't think this is the right year for this." Somebody may say, "I really want to do this. I hope if Kagan retires and there's a
Right.
shift in the court."
So all we get is the grant or no grant. We don't get the explanation for why they decided to grant cert or refuse,
It
right?
is very occasionally someone will dissent from a denial of certiorari. It's very, very rare. It happened in a famous death penalty case, but it didn't happen here. It feels like it's a no, but it's a terrible bet. It's a terrible bet.
Steelman the opposition. So what's
Oh,
the
by steelman the
opposition case?
opposition. I love
Yeah,
steelmanning things. Let me just
sure.
straw man
Okay.
straw man the easy case, and then we could steelman the opposite case.
All right.
Okay. I'm not going to bet 85. I'm not going to put in money, $100, for example, to win $15 in 3 years. Right. So first of all, even if we classified this as a lock, and we're going to do an episode soon on locks,
Yeah.
we'll go through each of our
I
best
got one
locks.
for next week too. So yeah.
Great. We'll go through our best locks and we'll talk through. I told you before that I think there's sort of an implied return, an implied guaranteed return on Kalshi, that there are some bets here, like we talk about Trump getting impeached. He's not going to get impeached. So
Right.
why isn't, there's just, you can get 12% on that, 12 cents on that, which is effectively like 15% over the course of the year, plus your 3% interest.
So you double the market return at that point on average. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's great.
that's what I think is kind of the money market rate on Kalshi. Now, what would you do if you put that money in the stock market? You do comparably, on average, maybe it's a little better than that.
No, you mean the stock market over a year?
Yeah, what is about the
Stock market
10%?
returns 8 to 10% a
10%.
year.
Yeah, that's what I would think
Yeah.
is right. Okay. So here I'd be putting in, if I'm betting the no on the Supreme Court overturning Obergefell, I'm getting a 5% return per year. And honestly, I don't think there's any value in it. I think that is I think there's a chance it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a chance too, but I think, the people who think that it's going to happen out of hand have to qualify.
Oh,
But I
sure,
agree
sure.
with you. Basically, there's a huge opportunity cost here, and there are clearly markets that have shorter duration resolution criteria and have better returns. So
I
I would
don't think
pass too.
it's not a good bet either way. The no price is just not appealing. Now, if it was a 1% yes,
You might take it.
I'd actually probably bet a lot of
I
money
think I would too.
because I would just hope that Sam Alito went out and gave a speech and just said something about how bad Obergefell was,
Right.
and there'd be a day where it went up to 2% and 2 cents or 3 cents, and I doubled my
Cash out
money.
immediately.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
All right. Anything more to say about the Obergefell decision and whether or not it'll be overturned?
I think we've exhausted that
I
subject.
think we have. I think we have. So let's move on to probably the last market we'll discuss in our Supreme Court cases today. So will SCOTUS ban counting mail ballots after Election Day? Where do you think the court would come down on this? First of all, is there a case pending that takes up this issue?
There is.
Okay.
So it's Watson versus the Republican National Committee, and basically this is a challenge that is based on the election reform law that was passed after COVID. Okay, and so effectively, what's trying to be done, the argument is that the federal statute, the federal post-COVID statute, preempts state laws that allow the late counting of ballots. Okay? It is, based on the statutory language, a very, very thin argument.
Mhm.
Okay? Now, I think the the Supreme Court will not ban it. Okay? I think the Supreme Court will not find federal preemption. But what's interesting here, and I do think the court still is subject to this. So there's a very famous and influential book called Democracy and Distrust by a political scientist named John Hart Ely. And it says that one of the court's core functions is to preserve democracy, right?
'Kay. We'll see.
Maybe if you're listening, you haven't read it,
Mm.
but every justice of the Supreme Court read it in law school.
Got it.
Okay. As everyone who goes to, I read it. I read it in college. It's a reference point for all of them. What's interesting here is it's not clear entirely what way that principle cuts. So a lot of Democrats get up in arms about this, but it's not insane for the federal government to have oversight over these procedures. And it's important. Look, if we had said, let's say, not so hypothetically, that Texas had said, we're not going to count your ballot if it comes in after 8 o'clock on election day.
That would
Okay.
be presumptively fine,
Or
right?
let's say Texas had said, we're not even going to count mail-in ballots.
Sure, they have the right to regulate their own elections, right?
Okay, now let's say the Biden administration comes in during COVID and says, oh, we're going to pass a statute requiring Texas to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I presume every Democrat would be like, oh, that's great. That's great. We like federal preemption, right? And so I just say this because, and this is the way a Supreme Court justice is going to think.
Right.
It's not clear that federal preemption is inherently right or wrong, right? It's the same way, I used to think federalism was stupid, and then Trump came along and
Thank God for federalism.
and eviscerated, every environmental regulation in California. Meanwhile, is trying to hold on. I'm like, well, thank God for California. And now, they're effectively trying to preempt California's environmental regulations.
I've been a big federalist my whole life.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yep.
good for you. I uh, my gut says I wouldn't bet a ton of money on this, but the statutory argument is so weak that I think, and this is basically, it's the counting of ballots that arrive after election day. So it's
Mhm.
effectively a mail-in ballot that you've sent 2 days before.
Right.
I just don't see that the Supreme Court is going to say that it's federally preempted, but it feels to me like it's a 90%er as
And right
opposed
now we're
it's
at
69%.
69.
So I have a small no bet on this.
Right.
I could say that conclusively.
All right. Makes sense.
Um,
What else in the legal space is interesting right now? Anything else you want to flag?
I got one, which we could talk about. The There's a market for whether the Trump administration is going to argue that pardons, a Biden pardon is invalid. So, will the Department of Justice claim a Biden pardon is void in court? That's interesting. Price. So I bought a fair amount of this on a no of 81 cents.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I hadn't looked at this, and now the spread is between 93 and 86 cents. There's effectively no chance that the Trump administration will do this. And
It's not even clear to me how they could argue it. Do you?
correct, there would be no legal basis for it.
Yeah.
And just think about, okay, even the Trump administration is sort of constrained by I'm blanking for a second on the name of the Attorney General.
Oh, is it Bond? No.
Yeah, Pam Bondi.
Yeah, Bondi.
So even Pam Bondi is there's a limit to the hypocrisy, right? So Trump has pardoned, tons of people corruptly, dare say. So what are they going to go and say that the pardons are invalid because they were signed by AutoPen? I mean, it's more, nobody's ever made such an argument. It would be against their interest. They're not going to be able to stand in front of a federal judge and say Biden's Biden's pardons are invalid, but mine are valid.
Right. There's no legal basis, and the optics of trying to establish a fictitious one would be disastrous.
So
I
this
hear
this
you.
one's this one's crazy. This
Yeah.
one should be, this one, the no should be just the time value of money, whatever. So I actually thought, again, we'll do a show on locks, but I got the no at 81 cents. So that's like a 20% return. Actually, it's 20 cents over 80 cents. So it's a 25% return over, I bought it last week, over 10 months. That's pretty good. So I don't know whether there's still opportunity there or not, but that's
Yeah, it
it's
looks
a good
like
one.
from the order book, if listeners were interested, you could probably still get it for around 83 cents if you put in some orders.
Hmm.
Yeah, the spread is enough. So, hey, you could put in an order at 83 and put in a sell order at 93 and just make money all day.
Right. You think in those terms. I never think in those terms. It's interesting. And I could see it. You're just sort of like you're acting as a market maker, basically.
Basically, and, if you put, like, let's say how much capital you have tied up. So it's $300, which is, or, about that, somewhere around that. If you had more and you put a sell order at 93, you would depress the prices in the market because you could look at the capital structure of the order book. There's basically no resistance at 93. So if you create that resistance, our viewers are going to be happy because they'll be able to pick up 83-cent no shares.
Hmm. All right. Actually, maybe I know shockingly little about this. I understood what you said, but I never think in those terms.
It only works in thin volume markets. So
Hmm.
you're looking at this market here. It has 80K in total traded volume, or 60. 60. That's a pretty thin market. That's why you see such a big spread. So
I had a lot of money in the Kevin Warsh appointment, and I saw that there was $200 million in the market or something like that. It was an extraordinary amount of money.
and you would think that the market would be efficiently priced because there's so much capital, and yet you still picked up a free return, basically.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I got a 2 or 3% return.
Yeah.
That he would nominate the person he said he would nominate. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, so we're gonna try to. Well, we'll be back. Maybe we'll focus on Iran next week.
Yeah, my thought is to focus on Iran. I have one really good lock that I want to discuss with people. It hits on a few different concepts that we discussed today. So we'll talk about the payout criterion and whether or not it's a lock, which I think it's a hard lock. So that's one market in mind. But there are a few in the Iran space, and next week we'll discuss them in more detail. We're also thinking about doing that Oscars episode
Yeah. Well,
pretty
maybe
soon,
we'll
right?
pop in with a special episode. We'll see if we can pull it off.
Yeah, just to mix things up, not politics all the time, right?
All right.
Uh, all
Be
right, folks.
be well.
Be well.
Universal Basic Calci Guys was created and is hosted by Michael Horahan and Evan Mandery. Our producer is Amir Rasulov. Our theme song is Passing Trains by Nathan Eklund. You can follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at UBK Guys, or email us at admin@ubkguys.com. The content on Universal Basic Calci Guys is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute trading, financial, or investment advice. Nothing discussed on this show should be construed as a recommendation to buy or sell contracts on any prediction market. Trading on prediction markets involves real financial risk, and you could lose money. Always do your own research and consider your own financial situation before trading. The hosts may and often do hold positions in markets discussed on the show. Views expressed by guests are their own and do not reflect the positions of the show or its hosts. If you or someone you know is struggling with problem gambling, free and confidential help is available 24/7 through the National Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800 522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org.